The Chop Chop Lady, the brutal dismemberment of Elsa Castillo. The humid, relentless heat of a Laguna morning in September 1993 clung to everything. A physical weight on the shoulders of the tricycle drivers idling near the roadside in Barangay Puting Kehoe, Sta Rosa. The air, thick with the scent of diesel, dried grass, and distant roasting pork, was otherwise ordinary. The buzz of flies, however, was louder here, more insistent, forming a shifting, iridescent cloud near a clump of tall cogon grass by the South Luzon Expressway's edge. Curiosity, that universal human itch, drew a small crowd. A driver, peering through the blades, had seen something that didn't belong. Not a discarded sack of rice or a dead animal. The color was wrong. The shape was horrifically, unmistakably human. A woman's head, severed cleanly at the neck. It lay tilted on the soil, dark hair matted, eyes closed as if in a troubled sleep. The collective gasp of the onlookers was swallowed by the roar of passing trucks. This was no accident scene from the highway. This was a message, a deliberate act of monstrous fury. The commotion summoned more people, vendors, bystanders, children shooed away by frantic adults. Someone called the authorities. The grisly discovery sent a shockwave through the quiet barangay, a wave that would soon crash against the walls of the National Bureau of Investigation in Manila. Agents, dispatched to investigate a missing persons report that now took on a dreadful clarity, arrived to a scene of primal horror. They weren't just looking for a woman anymore. They were piecing together a nightmare. This was the opening act of one of the Philippines' most gruesome and sensational crimes of the 1990s, a story of illicit love, cold-blooded murder, and a dismemberment so methodical it would earn the victim a tragic, tabloid-bestowed nickname, the Chop Chop Lady. Her name was Elsa Castillo, and the man at the center of the storm, the prime suspect with whom her fate was irrevocably linked, was her American lover, Mark Whisenhunt. Part 1. A love forged in the corporate shadows. In 1993, Elsa Castillo was a woman navigating the complexities of a life in transition. In her 30s, she was the assistant personnel manager at a car distributor company in Mandaluyong, a position that spoke of her competence, her professionalism, and her ambition. She was married, but the bonds of that union had frayed. The relationship had reached an impasse, leading to a separation. Elsa was, in many ways, reclaiming her independence, building a career, and facing an uncertain future alone. Her workplace, however, offered an unexpected and complicated solace. Her direct superior, the general manager, was Mark Whisenhunt. An American expatriate, Whisenhunt cut a figure of authority and success. He, too, was married, but like Elsa, his marriage was a distant reality, an estrangement from a wife far away. They shared more than a professional space. They shared a state of marital limbo. In the close confines of the corporate environment, a bond formed. It began with shared lunches, extended meetings, confidences exchanged after hours. The professional respect deepened into personal affection, and affection, in the emotionally charged vacuum of their personal lives, blossomed into a full-blown love affair. It was a dangerous game. Office romances are always fraught, but one between a married Filipino woman and her married American boss in the early 90s was a recipe for scandal. The gossip was inevitable. Whispers followed them in the hallways. Glances were exchanged in the cafeteria. The weight of the secret, the judgmental eyes of colleagues, became a burden. To protect what they had, or perhaps to salvage her own reputation, Elsa made a decisive move. She resigned from her position at the company. She walked away from her career, a sacrifice presumably made for the sake of their relationship. But stepping away from the job did not mean stepping away from Stephen. Their affair continued, now away from the prying eyes of the office, conducted in the more private, yet ultimately more perilous, space of Stephen's world. Stephen Whisenhunt lived in a condominium in the upscale neighborhood of Green Hills, San Juan. It was a bachelor pad that served as the primary stage for their relationship. He maintained the trappings of his managerial life: a company car, a personal driver, a house helper. The driver was a man named Demetrio Ravello, known to everyone as Rio. Observant, quiet, and loyal, Rio was a constant, peripheral figure in Stephen's life, privy to the comings and goings, the routines, and the small dramas. For a time, The arrangement seemed to work. Elsa would visit Stephen at his condo. They built a private world. But cracks, as they always do, began to show. The pressures were manifold. The cultural complexities, the shadow of their abandoned marriages, the inherent instability of a relationship born in secrecy. By September 1993, a critical tension had entered the dynamic. Rumors, later supported by witness accounts, suggested that Elsa was having second thoughts. The weight of the affair, the sacrifice of her job, the uncertain future with a man who was still technically married, it all seemed to be converging into a painful realization. She was, according to those who knew her, considering a return to her husband. She was breaking up with Mark Whisenhunt. Part 2. The Day the World Changed, September 23, 1993. The final, fatal chapter began on a Thursday morning that felt no different from any other. At around 8:30 a.m. on September 23rd, Mark Whisenhunt gave his driver, Rio, a routine instruction: go to Blumentritt, Manila, and pick up Elsa from her parents' home. Rio, a man of habit, drove the familiar route from Green Hills into the bustling heart of Manila. He arrived at the Castillo residence around 10:30 a.m. There, on the street corner, stood Elsa. Rio would later recall the details with chilling clarity to investigators. She was wearing a violet floral print blouse. She carried 3 bags: a paper bag, a matching violet handbag, and a thick brown leather bag. She got into the car, and Rio drove her back to the Green Hills condominium. It was a journey she had taken many times before. There was no indication that this trip would be her last. Rio dropped Elsa off at the condo. The day proceeded with a semblance of normalcy. Around 2 p.m., Elsa gave Rio an errand. She asked him to go to their former office in Mandaluyong to deliver the paper bag to a former colleague. Rio did as asked, delivered the bag, and returned to the condo afterwards. Upon his return, Stephen gave him instructions for the evening: don't leave. I'll be taking Elsa home at 10 p.m. Rio waited. 10 o'clock came, then passed. The door to Stephen's bedroom remained closed. Elsa did not emerge. Stephen himself offered no explanation, no new orders. Puzzled but not unduly alarmed, domestic tensions were not his business. Rio eventually sought out the house helper, a woman named Lucy. He told her he was going home for the night, assuming plans had changed. He left the condo, leaving Stephen and Elsa inside the unit, behind that closed bedroom door. Part 3. The Unraveling, September 24th to 25th, 1993. Rio reported for work the next day, Friday, September 24th, at his usual time. The atmosphere in the condo was odd, but subtly so. Around noon, the helper Lucy approached him with a question that seemed mundane yet would later echo with significance. Had he seen a large kitchen knife? It was missing from its usual place. As they discussed this, Mark Whisenhunt, overhearing, interjected. He said the knife was in his room. He walked into the bedroom, retrieved it, and handed it directly to Lucy. The act was strangely blunt, a deviation from the unspoken boundaries between employer and staff. Why was a large kitchen knife in the master bedroom? Rio filed the moment away, a small, discordant note. The day dragged on with an eerie quiet. The bedroom door stayed shut. Rio saw no sign of Elsa. In the late afternoon, around 3:40 p.m., Lucy asked Rio to buy cigarettes for Stephen. He did. Then, around 5 p.m., Stephen told Rio he could go home early. It was a minor kindness, but in the context of Elsa's unexplained absence, it felt like a dismissal. Saturday, September 25th, was payday. Rio arrived early at the condo. He asked Stephen for permission to go to the company office to collect his salary. Stephen agreed. At the office, the colleague who had received the paper bag from Elsa 2 days earlier asked Rio a casual, friendly question. Is Elsa still at Stephen's condo? Operating on the assumption from Thursday night, Rio replied, yes, she's still there. Another office staff member then handed Rio a bundle of large, black plastic garbage bags. These are for Elsa, they said. It was an odd request, but Rio, non-confrontational and dutiful, took the bags without question. He returned to the Green Hills condo and presented them to Stephen. These are for Elsa, from the office, he said. Stephen took them, his response casual, yes, they're for her. Stephen then gave Rio a new set of instructions. He was to drive Lucy to Cubeo. After that, he should go to his own home, pack some clothes, and prepare for a trip. They were going to Bagak, Bataan, where Stephen's family owned a rest house, a beachfront mansion. Rio followed the orders precisely. He drove Lucy, went home, packed a bag, and returned to the condo by 10 a.m., ready for the journey. Stephen had one more pre-trip errand. He asked Rio to go to the office to get a gas slip for the car. Rio complied, fetched the slip, fueled the car, and returned to the condo. With everything seemingly ready, Rio settled into the servants' quarters to wait for the final signal to depart. He turned on the television, the mindless chatter of a noontime show filling the small room. Then, Stephen walked in. The American's demeanor was altered, strained. He looked at his driver and asked a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Rio, how long do you want to keep working for me?" Rio, sensing a test of loyalty, gave the expected answer. "For as long as I can, sir. Because I trust you completely." What happened next seared itself into Rio's memory. Stephen Mark Whisenhunt, the confident, composed executive, broke down. Tears welled in his eyes. He stepped forward and embraced Rio, a gesture of desperate intimacy that shattered the professional barrier between them. Then he confessed, "Rio, I have a problem." "What's wrong, sir?" Rio asked, his own anxiety spiking. The words fell like stones. "Elsa is dead." A cold dread gripped Rio. The unexplained absence, the closed door, the strange energy of the past 2 days. It all coalesced into a terrifying reality. "Why did you kill her, sir?" he blurted out. Stephen vehemently denied murder. "I didn't kill her," he insisted. "She died in her sleep." It was a pathetic, unbelievable defense. Thinking quickly, perhaps trying to protect his employer from himself, Rio offered practical advice. "Sir, you should have her body autopsied, so you won't be suspected." But the truth, a more horrific truth, was already straining to get out. Stephen looked at his driver, the man he had just embraced, and confessed further. "I already cut off her head." The world stopped for Rio. The cheerful noise from the TV became a distant, mocking buzz. The image was unthinkable. The woman he had picked up just 2 days ago, in her violet blouse, carrying her bags, dismembered. And Stephen, in his fractured state, compounded the horror. "Do you want to see her?" he asked. Rio refused, a surge of primal revulsion and fear overriding any sense of duty. The revelation had transformed his boss from a flawed man into a monster. The immediate problem for Stephen, however, was logistics. He had a dismembered body in his bathroom, and he needed to dispose of it. The black garbage bags from the office now took on a macabre purpose. Part 4. The Grisly Errand. Shaken but trapped, Rio became an unwilling accomplice. Stephen, regaining a chilling semblance of composure, directed them to move. First, they needed supplies. He ordered Rio to drive him to a mall in Green Hills. There, Stephen purchased a large, durable black and gray roller suitcase with a zipper. Rio noticed his employer's eyes were red and swollen from crying, a bizarre contrast to the mundane act of buying luggage. Back at the condo, Stephen issued the unthinkable command. Rio was to go into the master bedroom, wrap Elsa's body parts in the black garbage bags, and place them in the new suitcase. The bedroom door, closed for over 48 hours, was finally opened. The scene that greeted Rio in the attached bathroom was the stuff of pure nightmare. Elsa Castillo's body had been expertly, horrifically dissected. Her head, her hands, her feet, and the sections of her torso were laid out. The butchery was clinical. The air was thick with a metallic, sickly sweet smell. Following orders, his mind likely retreating into a numb, mechanical state, Rio began the grisly task. He had to handle the remains. At one point, he lifted the severed head by its hair. He saw Elsa's face, her features peaceful in death, a stark, tragic contrast to the violence that had been visited upon her. They packed the parts into 3 separate garbage bags, then placed these into the large roller suitcase. The weight was considerable, psychological and physical. They maneuvered the suitcase out of the condo and loaded it into the trunk of Stephen's car. Stephen took the passenger seat, an abdication of control that placed Rio in the driver's seat of this funeral procession. It was around 2 p.m. on Saturday, September 25th. Stephen directed Rio to head south, saying they were going to Tagaytay and Batangas. The car merged onto the South Luzon Expressway, SLEX, the ribbon of concrete carrying them away from the scene of the crime. But as they approached the area of Sta Rosa, Laguna, Near the exits for Puting Kehoe and Sillingen, Stephen ordered Rio to pull over onto the shoulder. The instruction was cold and direct. Rio was to retrieve the suitcase from the trunk, carry it to the roadside, and dump the garbage bags containing Elsa's remains. The bustling highway, with cars whizzing by, became their dumping ground. Rio did it, heaving the heavy bags into the tall grass by the roadside. In that moment, Elsa Castillo, the assistant manager, the lover, the daughter, was reduced to discarded refuse. The act complete, Stephen's demeanor shifted again. "Let's go, Rio. We're heading to Bataan." The destination had changed. They were now going north. From SLEX, they cut across to EDSA, then onto the North Luzon Expressway, NLEX, beginning the long drive to the Whisenhunt family's beach house in Bagac. The journey was a continuation of the disposal operation. Along the way, Stephen directed Rio to stop twice more. First, somewhere in Pilar, Bataan, Elsa's violet handbag was thrown from the car. Later, at the boundary of Bagac, the rest of her clothes, likely the floral blouse, her other belongings, were discarded. They finally arrived at the imposing Whisenhunt mansion close to midnight. For Rio, any semblance of normalcy was gone. He was now a witness to murder and mutilation, alone in a remote house with the perpetrator. Fear was his only companion. He later confessed he couldn't sleep, terrified that he might be silenced, that he might become Stephen's next victim. The next morning, Sunday, September 26th, Stephen's focus was on cover-up. Around 11 a.m., he ordered Rio to thoroughly clean the trunk of the car to eliminate any lingering odor. By 1 p.m., they were back on the road to Manila. When they reached EDSA in the mid-afternoon, Rio, his nerves frayed to breaking point, asked to be dropped off so he could go home. Stephen agreed, handing him some money. "Take a vacation, Rio," he said, a final, hollow gesture of normalcy. Part 5. The Confession and the Manhunt. Rio went home, but the horror came with him. The images, the smells, the weight of the secret were unbearable. He unburdened himself to his wife, the words tumbling out in a terrified rush. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. They needed to go to the authorities. They had to talk to someone they could trust. On Monday, September 27th, with the help of a family friend who was a prosecutor, Rio and his wife found themselves at the Department of Justice and were subsequently referred to the National Bureau of Investigation, NBI. Rio's story, when he told it, sounded like the plot of a lurid crime film. Seasoned NBI agents were skeptical. A beheading? Dismemberment? A wealthy American executive? It seemed too grotesque, too theatrical to be true. They suspected exaggeration, a fabrication perhaps motivated by some unknown grudge. But a claim this grave demanded verification. Agents decided to retrace the route Rio described. They drove south on SLEX, exiting at STA Rosa, Laguna. As they neared the area Rio had indicated, Puting Kehoe, they saw a crowd gathered on the roadside. Their skepticism evaporated in an instant. The tricycle drivers had made the discovery hours earlier. The scene was exactly as Rio had said. A woman's severed head and other body parts, scattered and gruesome, left for the world to find. The NBI agents took charge, collecting the remains with somber professionalism. The body parts were transported to a funeral home. The arduous task of notification fell to them. Elsa Castillo's family, who had last seen her waiting for a ride on a street corner, had to be told their daughter and sister was not just dead, but had been slaughtered and desecrated. Now acting on solid evidence, the NBI moved swiftly. The following day, Tuesday, September 28th, a team descended upon Stephen Whisenhunt's office in Mandaluyong. They placed him under arrest. Agents immediately noted his physical condition, bruises on his cheek, cuts on his lip, and other injuries on his body. They also impounded his car, the vehicle Rio had described as the hearse for Elsa's remains. Before the car was towed, Stephen asked to retrieve his personal items from the trunk. It was a fateful request. As he popped the trunk open, a wave of putrid, overpowering odor blasted out. It was the smell of death, unmistakable and visceral. People nearby recoiled, covering their noses and mouths. The stench was a silent, damning witness. Upon inspection, NBI forensic experts found telltale traces of blood on the plywood lining of the trunk. Stephen Whisenhunt was hauled to NBI headquarters. where, after some consultation, he signed a waiver for an urgent preliminary investigation, a move that suggested a belief in his ability to explain everything away. The net tightened the next day, September 29th. Armed with a search warrant, NBI agents combed through Stephen's Green Hills condominium. The cleanup had been imperfect. In the bathroom, the site of the dismemberment, luminol and other tests revealed blood traces that had seeped into grout and crevices. More blood was found on a bedroom lampshade, on the bed frame, on a shoe, and even, bizarrely, on a bottle of cough syrup. The blood type matched Elsa's. Agents also followed the second disposal route, recovering Elsa's violet bag and other personal items along the roads to Bataan, just as Rio had described. The autopsy performed on Elsa's reassembled body provided the final, brutal facts. The cause of death was multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. The dismemberment had been post-mortem, a frenzied act of concealment and perhaps deeper rage. The pathologist noted a further horrifying detail. Not only were her head, hands, and feet severed, but her knees were missing. And most disturbingly, her private parts had been excised. This mutilation suggested a fury that went beyond mere murder, a symbolic annihilation focused on her identity and sexuality. Part 6. The Trial, 2 Stories, 1 Truth. Weeks later, Stephen Mark Whisenhunt was formally charged with murder before the Pasig Regional Trial Court. The trial that followed was a sensational media spectacle, dissecting the sordid details of the affair and the gruesome crime. 2 diametrically opposed narratives clashed in the courtroom. The prosecution's case rested on the compelling, corroborated testimony of Demetrio Rio Ravello. His account was detailed, sequential, and, critically, had led directly to the discovery of the body. The physical evidence powerfully backed his story: the blood in the condo and car, the recovered belongings, the timeline of purchases, the suitcase, and the testimony of the helper Lucy about the missing and returned kitchen knife. Rio's immediate reporting to authorities, driven by fear and a guilty conscience, lent him credibility. He had nothing obvious to gain and everything to lose by accusing his powerful employer. Stephen Whisenhunt's defense was one of complete denial and an alternative timeline. He took the stand and presented a very different story. He claimed he never asked Rio to pick up Elsa on September 23rd. He said he was feeling ill that day and never left his condo. He insisted he never saw Rio at all on September 24th. As for September 25th, he said he felt better and decided on a spontaneous trip to Bataan with Rio. They left the condo between 1 o'clock and 1:30 p.m., hours before Rio placed the dismemberment and disposal. He claimed they arrived at the family beach house by 5 p.m., where his parents and grandmother saw him. His mother supported this alibi, testifying that her son arrived around 5 p.m. on the 25th, contradicting Rio's midnight arrival time. She said Stephen was cheerful, even going jet skiing the next morning. Stephen explained his visible injuries not as signs of a struggle with a victim, but as the result of his jet ski mishap and a separate fall on the stairs at the mansion. He professed his love for Elsa, claiming he had no motive to kill her. To explain a potential source of danger, he presented anonymous, threatening letters he said he had received. One read, "Thank you for lending your car and driver. But you meddle too much, Steve. You're shameless. You're like a demon. One day, I'll make you pay." Another warned, "Hands off what doesn't belong to you. If you interfere, death will catch up with you." Stephen testified that Elsa believed these letters came from her estranged husband, implying a different killer with a different motive. His aunt also testified, saying she visited the condo on the 23rd and saw no one in the bedroom or bathroom. It was a classic he said battle, but the weight of evidence tilted decisively. The court found Rio's testimony credible and consistent. His story was not a perfect narrative. It was the messy, illogical, and emotionally charged account of a man caught in a nightmare. The physical evidence was its bedrock. The blood, the trash bags, the suitcase receipt, the recovered items. They formed an unbreakable chain linking Whisenhunt to the crime. His alibi, supported by family, seemed contrived. The jet ski story for the bruises was viewed with particular skepticism. The injuries were more consistent with a violent physical struggle than a water sports accident. The judges saw through the defense. The anonymous letters were unverified and smacked of a fabrication. The motive, far from being absent, was tragically clear, a crime of passion. Elsa Castillo was ending the affair. For a man like Stephen Whisenhunt, used to control, authority, and getting what he wanted, this rejection, combined with the pressures of their secret life, may have sparked a catastrophic, homicidal rage. The overkill, the multiple stabs, the decapitation, the specific mutilations spoke of a fury that was profoundly personal. In January 1996, after a lengthy trial, the Pasig Regional Trial Court rendered its verdict. Stephen Mark Whisenhunt was found guilty beyond reasonable doubt of the murder of Elsa Santos Castillo. He was sentenced to reclusion perpetua or life imprisonment. The court also ordered him to pay 3 million Cuban pesos in damages to Elsa's grieving family. In 2001, the Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and increased the damages, ordering Whisenhunt to pay an additional 2.25 million Cuban pesos for actual, civil, moral, and exemplary damages, plus attorney's fees. Part 7. Release and Legacy. Stephen Whisenhunt began his life sentence at the New Bilibid prison in Muntinlupa. The story of the Chop Chop Lady and her American killer faded from daily headlines, but remained a dark landmark in Philippine true crime history. It inspired TV movie adaptations and countless news magazine features, a cautionary tale about the deadly potential of forbidden love. Then, on December 27, 2012, a new development stirred public outrage. After 19 years and 3 months in prison, Stephen Mark Whisenhunt was released from Bilibid. He had qualified for release under the provisions for Good Conduct Time Allowance, GCTA, a law that reduces sentences for inmates who exhibit good behavior. The calculation, approved by the court, deemed him eligible for freedom. The news was met with anguish by Elsa Castillo's family and sparked public debate about the justice system. Was 19 years sufficient punishment for such a brutal, premeditated murder and desecration of a human body? 2 months after his release, in February 2013, the Bureau of Immigration enforced a secondary punishment, deportation. Whisenhunt was flown out of the Philippines and back to the United States. He was permanently blacklisted, banned from ever returning to the country where he had committed his monstrous crime. Epilogue: Unanswered questions. The legal case was closed, but the story of Elsa Castillo leaves haunting, unresolved questions. The full depth of Stephen Whisenhunt's motive remains shrouded in the privacy of that Green Hills condo. Was it purely the rage of a spurned lover? Was there a more complex dynamic, a threat of exposure, or a psychological break triggered by Elsa's decision to return to her husband? The removal of her private parts suggests a fury specifically targeted at her femininity and the intimate nature of their relationship, a final, grotesque act of possession and punishment. The role of Rio, the driver, is also a subject of contemplation. Was he a reluctant hero who did the right thing under unimaginable pressure, or a man who, through inaction at critical moments, enabled the cover-up until his own fear forced his hand? His testimony was crucial, but his participation in the disposal, however coerced, remains a morally complex facet of the tragedy. And finally, the question of justice lingers. The conviction was a victory for the Philippine judicial system. Yet, Whisenhunt's release after 19 years, while legal, felt to many like a deeply inadequate conclusion to a story of such profound violence. For Elsa's family, no amount of prison time or monetary damages could ever reassemble the life that was so viciously shattered on that September weekend. The roadside in Sta Rosa, Laguna, is quiet now. The expressway hums with the traffic of a nation moving forward. But the ghost of that September morning in 1993 remains, a stark reminder of how quickly the ordinary can dissolve into the unspeakable, and how the search for love in the shadows can lead, in the most terrible way imaginable, into the light. The story of Elsa Castillo is one of those cases that leaves you with more questions than answers, even after the gavel has fallen and the cell door has closed. A seemingly ordinary day, a terrible choice made in a moment of passion, and a cover-up so brutal it defies comprehension. We may never fully understand what happened in that Green Hills condo, or what truly drove Stephen Whisenhunt to commit such an act. But the evidence and the courts spoke clearly. Justice, in the eyes of the law, was served with a life sentence, though his release after 19 years still feels, to many, like an incomplete chapter. What do you think? We've laid out the facts as they were presented in court. Now, we want to hear from you. Put your theories in the comments below. Was this purely a crime of passion? Was there something more calculated at play? Do you believe Rio's testimony was the full story? And do you think the punishment ultimately fit the crime? Share this video with someone who remembers this case from the 90s, or with anyone interested in the complexities of true crime and justice. Every share helps us bring these important stories back into the light. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.